That will never work. You can't push that. Seriously? Don't. Oh my God, that's other things you can do. That's bad. You probably should find other hobbies. You ever learn how to stop? Stop. Be happy. Quit while you're Don't bother me. I've seen better. Do you really want to? And my third grade, get up. Welcome to Horrible Writing, the rawest, most candid, in-your-face writing show on the interwebs because none of us have time to suck. Let's do this. Welcome to episode 59 of Horrible Writing. I'm your host, Paul Sading. This time, I have with me author Caren Gussoff, Sumption, science fiction writer who lives out here in the great Pacific Northwest up near Seattle. She's the author of Homecoming, The Wave and Other Stories, and was a Carl Brennan Society's Octavia E. Butler Scholar at Clarion West. Those of you in the crowd who know what Clarion West is, that's quite a distinguished accomplishment. Caren, welcome to Horrible Writing. I can't wait to pick your brain.
Thanks, Paul.
This is going to be fun. Just for some context for listeners, I go to writers' conferences when I can or when I can afford to, and there's a great one held annually up near Seattle, so it's very easy for me to get to. This past year, I went and I saw Caren speaking on a panel, and this will shock none of you who know me. I'm a white male, and I've got a lot to learn about different voices in not just in story, but this is a writer podcast, so I like to focus on that, and I love to expand my boundaries and challenge things that I've been taught all of my life. And Caren was up on the stage and she's talking on a panel with all these other wonderful writers and authors. And the way she communicates this powerful message really moved me that night. And I basically kind of like blocked the hallway when she was trying to escape at a late night panel and asked her if she would come on the show. And she was gracious enough to actually accept the invite. So Caren, I am thrilled to have you here. And I know you're going to be able to help a lot of us today.
Thank you. And you did not block my way out. I was moving in slow motion out, being like, maybe somebody will want to talk to me now. Like, maybe, I don't know. I got some. So I was not.
So
I was not. You didn't block me.
I told you before we started that you were going to make me think of questions I didn't write down. And that's one of them right away. So as a writer, all of us aspire to be wanted on a panel someday at a writer's conference. So you've been an attendee and a panelist. Which one is more awkward when a panel is over? Is it being the panelist or is it being the audience member that would really like to approach one of the panelists?
Oh, it's totally being the panelist.
Really?
I mean,
okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you don't want to rush out of there and seem like you're just a terrible human being. But okay, let me at least speak for the writing panels. Most genre writers we're not exactly like socially graceful to begin with. So we're already, operating at a less than full tank. And so you kind of want to meander out. And I don't know what's worse is when people want to talk to you or when people don't want to talk to you, because when people don't want to talk to you, you feel like, oh, nobody cared and nobody reads and nobody loves me and I'm not that interesting. But then if people want to talk to you, then you also sort of feel awkward. And there's all this other stuff that goes, at least with me and my personal neuroses about being a pro is, all of your accomplishments in 275 will get you on the Metro bus. Like it's, when I was in grad school, I got an MFA in creative writing, which is a totally other show length topic. But I had this amazing teacher who, not a genre writer, but Carol Anshaw. And Carol Anshaw said to me, being a pro writer is a little bit like being a rutabaga farmer. Like we love rutabagas. the other farmers love rutabagas. We like to get together and talk about rutabagas, different recipes and all this other stuff. And occasionally there's some other people who will eat our rutabagas and want to talk about rutabagas, but to everybody else, nobody gives a crap, right? Yep. And I found that that's somewhat true. And so anyway, I'm off topic. I think it's harder to be a panelist because most of the time, the folks that you're approaching are really gratified that you want to ask them something or talk to them about their work or anything. We all work alone in our little rooms, and periodically or, come to try to interact with other people that we hope care about what we do at cons. So even if we seem, slightly weird or we're happy. We want you to come talk to us. So.
Well, and the thing that instigated this entire interview was something like that. I mean, not only were you a panelist and had that that experience of, how do I get out, make my escape, and also hold my chin up that somebody actually cared about what I talked about tonight, is in the context of what you actually talked about. The episode title for this episode is Invisible. And what I was hoping to talk to you about today and pick your brain about and share with the audience is that concept, that notion of being invisible. And this is applicable across the world. Dominating cultures can and often do oppress and subjugate and whatnot, and maybe even unintentionally. And here we are, two writers talking about this stuff. So to set the foundation for folks so they kind of understand where you're coming from with everything else I'm going to ask you after that, what is your reaction to that word itself, or that status, if you will, to be invisible?
It's something I think about a lot, and it's something I struggle with. And ultimately, though, where I've landed lately is invisibility. I'm ambivalent about it. There's a reason that invisibility is a superpower, right? There's some positive aspects to being invisible, and it's also incredibly painful to be invisible, and both of those things happen simultaneously. I struggle with a couple of different kinds of invisibility in terms of my existence, in terms of in the world in general, and then in writing specifically. I'm female. I'm not young. I'm not old either, but I'm out with it. I'm 45, which is not, it's not old. It's not old, but there is an invisibility that comes along with being somebody who's over 30. Mm-hmm. I'm also I'm half Romany, so I'm half Gypsy. Most people know that word more, which is also something that is both very visible and very invisible. Mm-hmm. The idea of gypsies in popular culture are very visible, and very, very, very little about what people see reflected or written about or use as things that are gypsy or that they describe as gypsy have very little to do with my experience as an ethnic gypsy, as a cultural gypsy. Let's see, so I also grew up working class, and that comes with a certain sense of invisibility as well, just in terms of the kinds of access, particularly in the writing world, that come with having more resources, financial and otherwise. And as I've become an adult, now I have a family, and I didn't marry someone who has a different background than I, so we both have to work. And so we're going to work, and we're going to work until we retire. And that's great. I love what I do as a day job, and it's part of the reason I have a day job is because my writing has not been able to pay my bills.
Mm-hmm.
And part of the reason my writing has not been able to pay my bills is because I have a day job.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a little bit of a struggle about keeping yourself out there, and without those kind of resources and the change in the way publishing happens. I love that publishing has become infinitely more democratic, but with that democratization comes, publishers don't have resources to throw at you in terms of a publicist
Mm-hmm.
and somebody to help you with marketing. And being a, awkward genre writer who's not necessarily also great at maximizing her public appearances all the time, that also contributes to a feeling of invisibility.
Mm-hmm.
How do you, how do you increase or decrease the signal to noise ratio?
Yes.
People have so many choices and they're all available right now. So how do I get what I'm doing out to the people that would be interested in what I'm doing? So I think a lot about all of those different ways that invisibility intersects, and there are ways that it benefits me. But there's definitely things that have been lifelong struggles because of it. And so I think that was a lot of what I was talking about at the panel. I think I was talking a little bit more about identity politics specifically. So gender, sexuality, ethnicity, how people self-define, and how that either makes them visible or invisible. So, but just to give you sort of the larger picture of why invisibility is something that's really always, it's a conversation in my work, and it's something that I think about just as I move through the world.
Well, and it was really eye-opening for me. You and I are both, it's, parallel destinations that took completely convoluted and disassociated paths. I mean, we're both from New York. We both ended up out in the Seattle area. And that experience in New York, I grew up in farm country, upstate near Syracuse, but a little out into the country from Syracuse. And we had one black family in our town, and that was it. Everybody else looked like me, smelled like me, believed like me, all of those things. Joining the military was one of the best things I could have done for myself as a human, because it exposed me to different people. And it was a great learning experience, and it still is to this day, to include that fateful night when I sat in on your panel. You just said something that really echoed to me with me, even though I've already heard you speak to it. And it's that invisibility of Romani/Gypsy, how it can be invisible and very, very prominent at the same time, and not necessarily for the right reasons. So to kind of help us, all of us understand that, you changed. I don't want to make you feel like I'm just giving you all kinds of platitudes. I mean, I've already got you on the line. We're going to do this interview. But you really changed the way I see the world. Bring
the platitudes.
It's since that conversation that I looked and before you even just said that line, I've noticed how much more sensitive I am to representation of Romani people. And it's always, now I'm noticing this. And folks, I am a skeptic. I don't just bend with the wind. As a matter of fact, I can be a contrarian. If a lot of people like something, I kind of already dislike it until it's earned its cause. So I don't bend with the wind, but I realized I've lived what you were talking about that night in that line that you just said about that. So with that experience and with that context, and folks, I gave you that long lead in because I think what Caren has to say about this is something that we can all listen to and understand if we're ready to listen to and understand. So Caren, talk to me and frame it your own way. This is, me ascribing value to it. And I don't mean to do that, but the term gypsy, why is that problematic? Can you help us kind of ground us and help us understand what the problem is with that?
Oh, sure. I mean, that's easy. That's low hanging fruit. So it's, the thing about gypsy is that in at least, in our culture, it's become an adjective, which is fine, right? So when people describe something as, I mean, if you look at Etsy or you look at eBay or you look at just any, pretty much any e-commerce site, like people describe or use gypsy and, basically to mean freewheeling or, bohemian, which is also a problematic term, but I'll not to, or to mean free spirited or nomadic or adventurous and romantic and all of those things, a lot of which are really, really wonderful ideas. However, people often don't realize that, that Romani are real people. It's an actual ethnicity. There's culture that's very, very important and very specifically tied to this, to my people. It goes back 1,000 years. It's a very insular culture. Sometimes it's not a lot of fun either, and not very freewheeling, and definitely not very romantic. And so, first of all, that's really difficult to navigate. It would be here's another example. I was trying to explain to somebody the other day, Halloween's coming. So Halloween is always, I love Halloween. It's one of my favorite holidays of all time, except when I see, gypsy costumes, which are absurd. I mean, so there's definitely some cultural precedence for having headscarves, which dilos in Romani, and long skirts, shosas, which what they're called in Romani. But in terms of anything else having to do with costume, is contrived from this idea of the romantic gypsy or the thieving gypsy. I mean, it would be sort of like having a costume that said Irish person and it had somebody with a big crucifix on, and then you had to stumble around and be drunk. It pulls certain stereotypical aspects that are may or may not have any root in any truth about the experience of being from that place or of that people, and heightening it to a point where that's all that is about that people. And it's weird and it's uncomfortable. And people often go, are you offended? And it's not so much that I'm offended. I just think it's problematic and uncomfortable for me. And then I see sort of the moving, breathing stereotype of what people think gypsy and gypsy life is like, on TV. I mean, I was watching, it was a few weeks ago, and I was homesick, and I was watching one of those, like one of the TV channels that shows all the old sitcoms and stuff. And I think it was like a Beverly Hillbillies or something. And, they run into a camp of gypsies where everyone's dancing and of course they're stealing stuff from everybody. And, and it's very strange to see one's culture be distilled down to just a couple of very specific and very weird ideas, or even when they're done with the intention of being flattering. Robert Silverberg, one of the greats of genre writing, he wrote Star of Gypsies, and Jakob, the legendary king of the Romani, is the star of it, and he's horrible. He's gross and misogynist, and I mean, he's just this over masculinized man, and tagging that as somebody whose Romani is the problem, not having a character that's gross. I mean, I actually love gross characters. I don't think every character in fiction should be cuddly and lovey. I love a good villain. I love a good flawed hero. I love a good, but that's not the point. So what I struggle with primarily is people just don't realize that, like, we've completely distanced the word gypsy from the people who live it. And I mean, I'm a social worker by day. And social workers are some of the most socially conscious, conscientious, kind, and fair-minded folks that you will ever meet, right? They work really hard, basically, they're on the front lines of social justice, right? That's why somebody becomes a social worker.
Mm-hmm.
It's not because of the rockin' paycheck. It's, you
guys aren't swimming
aside,
in it.
Like, if I had to pick something as poorly paying as writing to do for my day job, why not social work? But but even then, periodically, I will hear people slip out with something was a gyp. That person got gypped.
Yes.
And when I stop them and sort of say, hey, you do realize that word comes from gypsy, they're horrified. I mean, they are across the board horrified, want to crawl under their desk and not come out for 2 weeks, embarrassed.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a great example of how far the word has distanced itself from the reality. And depending on the Romany that you meet, some folks really want to reclaim gypsy and will use it to describe themselves, and others are really have a hard time with it. So, it's kind of it's a word that's in different stages of being reclaimed to different people.
Well,
so
you actually brought that up, and I'm glad you did, because it's a great segue into what I wanted to ask you about Romany.
Yeah.
You and I on the side talked about the push-pull of that experience, how it can be a struggle. Can you kind of help us? White dudes don't struggle with being, claiming that they're Irish or Polish or whatever it may be. So can you kind of help me understand, and by extension, the folks listening, understand something I just take for granted. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, but I think some of the not me stuff, or the Me Too stuff, or the not all white guys stuff, or I think a lot of the movements that are going on with folks speaking out about sexual assault is having some of that same discomfort happen with a lot of my friends that are white, straight males, right? Is with the Me Too movement, more and more people are feeling comfortable stepping forward and talking about, sexual assaults that have happened to them, or that they've, or that have happened to people that they love, or even just sexual impropriety. And a lot of the straight white men that I meet, who are wonderful men, I mean, who would never do any of this stuff, are struggling because it's uncomfortable to hear about some of these stories, because a lot of the stuff that folks talk about and are bringing to light and dissecting as being really assaultive, or just really making someone uncomfortable or fearful, are things that they've been messaged throughout their entire life are fine.
Right.
So some of them are looking back on things that they've done that could have been interpreted that way by the person that they were addressing. That was not their intent, right? Or, or feeling really uncomfortable with being lumped in with men who catcall, or, any of those sort of actions. And they're that feeling, like, a lot of them have been like, I get this kind of sick feeling in my stomach about it. And it's that's what I want to speak to. That's what it feels like. That idea that because of your existence as a white man, you are being lumped into a category that is being associated over and over with kinds of bad behavior, or threatening behavior, or just things that have nothing to do with the way you move through the world, the way you address potential partners or colleagues or friends. But the fact that when people talk about it, we're talking about the culture and the recent histories that have built basically a structure that is permissive of that kind of behavior. That feeling is what I'm talking about, of being this association, this adjective this description of this shawl that somebody's trying to sell on Etsy has nothing to do with what my life is like moving through the world as a gypsy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And it's something, even to this day, it's something I still try to wrap my head around. I don't, obviously this is not something, a light bulb opportunity for me.
Right.
But it is something I think it's important for listeners to empathize with and at least try to understand. One, from a humanistic element, that's always my priority. Be good humans. That's all I ask of everybody. But beyond that, because we're writers as well. So how can we do better when, as creatives, there are all kinds of people who will listen to this episode. So it won't only be poets and book authors and aspiring authors. It'll also be people who are into script writing and into audio drama, fiction podcasts. What can we do better? And you don't have to just narrow this down to Romany people. You can if you choose to, but what can we do better when it comes to representing someone who has lived that experience that you just talked about there and your own experience?
Well, first of all, we need to talk to each other, right? I mean, these are conversations that need to happen. We've spent a lot of time not talking about race and not talking about ethnicity and not talking about religion and not talking about the ways in which we both share experiences and have those experiences be very different because these are the lenses in which we're viewing things through. If you want to portray characters that are different than yourself, I am not of there's a lot of voices out there that will say you should write what you know, stick to what you know, and raise up voices, that are being written by the folks from these cultures. I agree with that. I think that's great. You have, if you're not Romany and you have a really deep interest in Romany stuff, there's a lot of great Romany writers. And one thing you can do is read them and tell people about them and raise up those voices. But I also think it's okay for you to write about Romany characters. But I think the task that you need to do is you need to not fall into giving them a headscarf and now they're Romany. Is you need to kind of spend a little bit of time, either, like I said, talking to different people who have that background, remembering, of course, my experience is going to be different than, other folks of Romany descent living in the US and, all of that. But there are some definite things that we have experienced, and there's some definite sort of big rocks in our culture and how we're taught to sort of think about the world that affect the way a situation feels, looks, and how we respond, how it unfolds. And I think you have to do a little bit of role playing if you want to create a character that's different than yourself. Is you need to kind of figure out a way to embody that and go, well, I'm having this character. Okay, they're going to Walgreens. Great. Somebody who's African American walking into a Walgreens and someone who's white walking into a Walgreens, or someone who reads white, there's some subtle differences. And those are worthy of note. Whether they ultimately belong in the work that you're writing, I don't know. You need to do what serves the work as well. And that's a terrible, horrible piece of advice, right? Which is, I don't have advice of what's going to make your depiction of somebody different than you perfect. Right. There's not a rule book, but a lot of it is about empathizing and trying to figure out the different ways in which all these different factors, race, class, religion, country of origin, all of those things intersect, that is going to affect somebody and how they move in the world. There's great courses and there's some great books. There's a really great book by Nisi Shaw and Cynthia Ward called Writing the Other. And it is a lot about writing whatever form you're writing, whatever your discipline is, about writing somebody who is not from your same sort of point in space and time. It's also an amazing resource if you want to write about somebody who doesn't even really exist. I use Writing the Other as a reference when I'm writing aliens. I'm working on a novella now that is told partially from the point of view of an alien, and trying to figure out what American culture specifically would look like to somebody who not only isn't American, but isn't from Earth and isn't even human, has been really difficult and really fun. Like trying to see what an alien would think of watching Caddyshack has been awesome and really hard, but really awesome.
That is awesome.
And so, this is, a million people are going to take me out of context, and I'm probably going to get some angry responses. But I do think you need to go to that level of thinking there's some things that the way a situation strikes somebody is going to be colored by their experiences. And what are the ways in which their experiences, which are different than mine, would change the way, that I'm playing this out. And really, honestly, I think it's talking to people. I think it's finding sensitivity readers. And I know there's a lot of folks that are, there's some tension in the genre community between folks on the left and folks on the right. And this is not even about that. I think this is about having conversations with people and doing gut checks. And that doesn't have anything to do with politics or anything. It's not about being a super squishy social justice warrior. It's about wanting to portray as authentic experience as you can, which seems to me an apolitical stance and should be the ultimate mark of greatness that we're striving for. And this is the way in which I found that you can do that.
That is awesome. I wanted to take a second out of this interview to let you know that my newest book is now out on Amazon for pre-order. You can pick up the horror anthology, 12 Deaths of Christmas, today for pre-order. It's coming out on Thanksgiving of 2018. 12 Wicked Tales of Horror, pretty much for any fan of Clive Barker's Books of Blood back in the day. Upscale stores in the middle of New York City that offers its customers more than they bargained for. Prodigal sons returning home for aunts' funerals, only to discover that an ancient entity awaits them. What about a town sheltering against the first snow and the evil it brings, or a mad king, a hired assassin, a world in the balance, and an eternal force manipulating all of them? This and much, much, much more wickedness in my new horror anthology, just in time for the holidays, called 12 Deaths of Christmas, that you can pick up on Amazon now. Let's get back to the interview. That is absolutely awesome answer. And so on top of that, then, maybe something, I don't want to say inclusive because I feel like that just borrows from a concept that I don't want to borrow from, but for more people to relate to this question regarding class and socioeconomic issues, you and I have talked, and I see and hear myself in a lot of your opinion on this. I don't want to speak to it. I'd much rather have my listeners hear enough of me. It's time for you to shine. So talk to me under the theme of invisibility, and we understand a little bit more now about romantic people, or even just people that aren't necessarily represented. One of the things that I've always realized, and I have always felt awkward about, when I go to like these conferences, right? I know it's in the Pacific Northwest, where I go to most of my writers' conferences, but it's the same thing I see all the time. Is you look out into the audience, and it's everybody that looks like me. They're just either male or female, but they all look like me, and we all come from the same walk of life, etc. And this is again why I wanted to talk to you about this stuff, because there's an underrepresented and underserved population out there, and some of that ties back into the socioeconomics of it, or I guess a lot of it does. So, can you talk to me about like your background and how it colored your view of the world, and kind of what your experience has been in respect to socioeconomics and almost, I want to say, barriers to entry into this?
Oh yeah. I mean, this is actually something I was having a conversation with another writer just last week, and I don't want to out him, but I probably will, just in terms of the details of our conversation. So he had an amazing book come out from Tor, which is like, I mean, it's Tor, right? It's a
hashtag
big,
life
wonderful
goals
publisher. Yeah. And they even threw him a contract for the following book. And he's so amazing. And he is also a young, well, he's in his 30s, father of 3 kids. And he works full time and he writes. And he just came back from Worldcon. And his book came out, his first book came out not quite a year ago, right? So he really should still be in the salad days on this, the Elysian Fields. And he was really sad and angry, because he got to Worldcon and he's on some panels at Worldcon and all this other stuff. And they didn't order, there were no copies of his book in the dealer room. And it was almost as if it hadn't happened. It had moved on. And he'd even, he'd talked to the bookseller and they had said, oh yeah, and it'll be there and stuff. And really what it was his inability to sort of really spend the last 8 months, going, touring and marketing his book and, really spending as much time as he could, or he did spend as much time as he could. I said spending, I guess, more time, really marketing this book. What he felt like was, he was a panelist at, he's a panelist at Worldcon. That's nothing to sneeze at. Right. And, he's got a second book coming out for nothing to sneeze at, but he felt like he kind of ran into a giant fizzle because came out 8 months ago. What have you done recently? Mm-hmm. And he was really kind of depressed because he works and he had done as much as he could and he had dedicated as much time as he could away from his family and away from his day job to be able to publicize and show up to things and rub elbows and make nice and, kiss hands and shake babies. Right. And we were talking about that because I had that kind of similar but different experience in the beginning of my career. It was less about class and more about the fact that I was young and dumb. Like, I know that there's a huge thing in publishing, not necessarily genre, but just publishing in general, where publishers love it when you're under 30. They just do, right? They love ingenues and young, like 25, under 25 people. Well, when my first book came out, Homecoming, I was 25 and had a 2-book deal and bunch of really good press on this book, and it was really exciting. And I had just come out of my MFA program, which, I can come back to. I've said that that's a worth its own show, but I'll tell you, I'm in debt from that program, and I have varying levels of how much I think in retrospect it helped my career. But anyway, the Village Voice called me writer on the verge and, blah, blah, blah. And I thought, well, I got it made, right? Here's the beginning of my literary career. The New Yorker just is going to send me a check and here we go. And, at some point the book sold for a while and then it fizzled. And that happens. On the other hand, there are books that folks are able to really throw down along with their publisher and spend money or time or both, touring, pushing, going on lots of podcasts, going on radio shows, doing classes, going to conferences, teaching things, and are able to kind of keep momentum going for things in a way that is incredibly difficult if you are living a life where you say, my book's coming out, I've been saving my 2 weeks of vacation. I'm going to spend my 2 weeks of vacation doing the book tour, and then I'm just going to do what I can on social media.
Right.
It's incredibly hard, going to conferences, going to festivals, going to, going to writing retreats, any of that stuff. It requires resources. It requires money, and it requires the ability to spend the time doing it. And it is really hard to not feel like you are missing opportunities when those are things that you can't access for various reasons. You've got kids, you've got bills, you've got whatever it is, right? And it becomes hard not to resent folks who do have those resources and are able to go and have those great opportunities. And there's definitely a feeling that you're not competing necessarily on a level playing field all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard enough with writing because, again, it doesn't matter whether you're a poet, screenwriter, whatever, there's an intangible thing that really does affect the trajectory of your career that none of us want to talk about unless it's not working for us, which is luck. And it sucks to say that. When I used to teach writing, I always found it incredibly depressing because people always wanted to know, how do you get published? How do you get published? And my advice to them, my answer was, write until you write something worth publishing, and then send it out and keep sending it out until it lands on the right person's desk on the right day at the right time.
Right. Yep.
And that's the truth. I mean, as far as I can tell, we want to make this a meritocracy. There's a lot of amazing writers and there's a lot of amazing work that doesn't get published or doesn't get the attention that it deserves for lots of reasons. And one of it is, the more that you show up, the better, the better you can, what I don't remember which of the founding fathers said, you make your own luck, and you do by throwing in and showing up and posting and coming and reading and teaching. But if you only have a limited amount of entries that you can buy and one of them doesn't pay out, it's hard not to feel sad.
Oh, yeah. No. And even the asset of time, like you were saying, we don't even have to boil it down to, the account in the black, money, the bank account. Some people don't have that currency of time. And to just validate what Caren said, literally this weekend I went to a different writers conference, and the keynote speaker not in a private session like I had a one-on-one with him, but he wasn't keynote speaking, he was teaching a session. But he said that, Caren, he said one of the secrets was just like what you talked about is you got to make that luck and the right manuscript at the right person at the right time. He sold a book to someone who a year earlier had rejected it, and he looked at us and he got this shit-eating grin on his face, and he said, I didn't change a single word in that book. He bought the book that last year he told me it wasn't good enough, and he talked like what you did. Sometimes it's just, they got cut off in traffic, they had an argument with their loved one on the way into the office, and it affects. But that currency of time, some folks don't have that time to tackle that task. So what would be your advice then to people on, or not necessarily on, but toward the fringes of, that socioeconomic bubble, and those folks who've got that passion, they've got the drive, they've got the work ethic, but they're just, they're not finding those ins, or they don't have access to those ins. What would be your, I don't want to say cheerleading because that sounds patronizing, but what would be your encouraging statement to them?
Am I allowed to curse?
Yes, you are.
Okay. Shit, man. I don't know. So here's what I do. which is, I don't know, you can take this as advice or this is just what one woman's perspective, which at some point I made a conscious decision and I decided the only thing that I know that I can control is my reaction, right? That's the only thing that I know that I can control. So I decided I'm going to keep writing because I don't love writing. I don't love the feeling when I'm writing. It's really hard and unpleasant for me, but it's what I do and it's what I'm best at and it's what I'm driven to do. So I do it. I love having written, I guess. So as long as I'm getting pleasure from having written and there's still things that I think that I have to say, I'm going to push on. And so at some point I accepted the fact that barring some exceptionally amazing luck, which, could happen. Don't rule me out yet. I'm just going to continue writing things that I think are worth being in the world and then finding a place for them to be. So once you get to pro level, a lot of folks, and this is the truth, will hold on to a story if they send it out to the pro markets and it doesn't get picked up. They won't send it to the medium markets or the for the love markets. And I to a certain extent, I understand that. But for me, given my resources and the time and energy and all the things that I can dedicate to my work, it does me no good on my hard drive. Right. So I will send something out to, top tier. And if it gets bounced from all of them, I make my way down to the middle tier, go all the way. I keep sending something out until it finds a home. For me, if it's out there, then somebody could read it. Whereas if it's precious on my Google Drive, nobody's going to read it. Does me no good. And it's against the very reason that I'm creating, right? I didn't start writing because I wanted to be a famous writer. I mean, of course I had that fantasy, but everybody does. But that's, really what I like to do is I like to tell stories. And I hope that there are people that get something from reading the stories that I write. So that keeps that going. And then I just do what I can. I try to strategize as best as I can with what I can show up for. And I try to make the most of it while I'm there. And, frankly, I just, I let myself get sad at the other stuff. It's worth being sad over. It's not worth stewing, quitting, or, hating other folks over, but it's, I honor my sadness and just move on. So, I also, and this is a popular, unpopular view. I also just don't have the time and energy to deal with the writer bullshit. And, there's a lot of social time and a lot of con time and things like that. You get a bunch of writers all drinking and talking about what they want their writing to do. And, all these things about the importance of writing and the importance of what they're doing and that they've bought into, which is lovely. And I don't begrudge them having bought into their own bullshit. I just don't have the time for it. So I kind of anti-pro that way. And I don't spend a lot of time anymore going to the writer parties or going to the, or going to crit groups or, sometimes to my detriment, but I have to kind of choose my battles. And I don't find those good for my blood pressure most of the time.
Yes.
So I just have made really deliberate decisions about what makes me happy, what I think is going to maximize the time and resources that I do have. And then I just keep writing, I just keep going as best as I can.
That is awesome. And one of the things, the tagline for the show is empowerment through candor. And folks, you're getting it with Caren, which now you can see why I fell in love with her in that panel. And I was like, I've got to talk to her and get her on the show if she'll let me. So Caren, being the good host that I am, I've asked you to come on, share your opinions about things. And you've been gracious, even though patrons know what kind of pizza toppings you will tolerate. I'll let that slide.
I will tolerate the intolerable.
But as any good host will do, I'll invite my guest in and I will make them share something horrendous about their life. So, listeners, if you're brand new to the show and you've never listened, I'm going to ask Caren to share a horrible writing experience. The name of the show is Horrible Writing. It's a little self-effacing. I like having fun at my own expense because I am not Stephen King the last time I checked. I don't have his bank account. So I don't even earn the interest he probably earns in a day in my entire year. But anyways, that aside, I ask these wonderful guests to share their horrible writing experience because woven into their story, you will learn something. You will learn where they've been, what makes them who they are today, and you'll also see that despite whatever Caren's about to share with us, she's still present, she's still creating, and she's still sharing her stories with the world. So with that being said, Caren, lay it on us. What is your horrible writing experience?
So I chose how you can utterly humiliate yourself in front of a venerable editor.
Uh-oh.
And still, still live, still publish, still okay. And I will leave the editor's name out of it. Again, though, I will probably out him just through the details and probably re-traumatize him, which is, okay. So just here's something else. Well, I mean, it's not that people don't know this about me. Lots of people know this about me, but your listeners might not know this about me, as I had sort of a weird little middle career in my 30s as a burlesque dancer. I hit sort of this very, very strange midlife crisis, and I'm really theatrical, and a bunch of things kind of all came to fruition at once. And so I did burlesque for a few years, and it was awesome. It was really fun and really empowering and really silly and all that stuff, right? Great. And I got to document my boobs when they looked great. So that's a piece of advice too. Like, document everything because it will never look better than it does now. So NorwestCon, quite a few years ago, I had recently graduated from Clarion West, which was an awesome spend of time and resources. It's incredibly expensive and incredibly difficult to get away from that for that long. But if you ever have the chance, it's that worth it. MFA, meh. Clarion West, totally. Okay. So I was still involved in the NorwestCon Fanish Fetish show. At that point, I was not doing burlesque, but I was hosting. So this happens at the same time as the Philip K. Dick Awards. Mm-hmm. So Leslie Howell, who was one of the workshop administrators at the time, she attends the PK Dick Awards, and she was really angry. Well, she was upset. She really wanted to see me perform. Especially, she wanted to see my outfit, which I had described as just a ridiculously over the top, just almost nightmarish in its construction schoolgirl outfit. I mean, it was just like as ridiculous as you can possibly imagine. And so I told her, okay, well, here's what I'm going to do. So right before the show starts is just about I said, I'll come over and I'll wave to you and you can come and see my outfit. And she was like, oh, okay, great. I didn't have a chance to do that. So I waited, so our show went, everything was great. And the PK Dick Awards were winding down. So I kind of was waiting for Leslie, and everything, wound down. And so most people have left, and Leslie is still there helping with cleaning up. And so I go in and I'm still in my outfit, which is also, so it's like platform Mary Janes, just ripped fishnets, just ridiculous, right? I mean, just like a really frothy plaid skirt and just all of it. So I go walking in there, and Leslie's, yeah. Okay. Oh, you look adorable. You look crazy. Yeah, it's so wonderful, blah, blah, blah. She's taking pictures and stuff like that. And in strides, supremely important editor.
Oh, no. Oh, no.
who's forgotten something at one of the tables. Now, Leslie, who knows everybody, calls him over.
Oh, no.
Oh, editor, have you met Caren Gussoff? I was just using Gussoff at the time. She just graduated from Clarion West, and she's a wonderful writer. And so he comes over, he takes one look at me, right? And I mean, I'm all boobs. It's great, not professional. So he comes over, trooper, stiffly sticks out his hand to shake my hand. I mean, and this particular editor is not a tall man. So he's, right about boob level. I'm wearing platforms. And Leslie, in her jovial way, sort of shoves us closer together and is like, you need to talk because she's amazing and interesting. And, so he shakes my hand and he goes, have you ever submitted to my big magazine?
Oh,
and
no.
I had, and I said, I have. And Leslie goes, oh, yes. You told me this, Caren. You sent him. And she says the title of the story that I sent him. And he is shaking my hand and he turns red and he's like, oh, yes, I read that one. Very, very good. Very good. And so Leslie is still trying to corral us closer and closer. So this venerable editor's nose is almost in my cleavage and we're shaking hands and talking about my work. And he's just so nicely, he looks like he wants to die.
Right.
And he, eventually wriggles his way out of Leslie's grasp and bolts.
Oh, no.
And so I just, and there's no, if anybody has ever met Leslie Howell at a con, she is just the best, wonderful. She has no idea that she's made anybody uncomfortable. She's just incredibly happy that she's brought together a venerable editor and one of her writers. And I'm going, crap, I can never send anything ever again to this magazine, ever.
Well,
so
we got to know, did you? Did you try again?
I did. I have. Well, the best thing was that same year I went to World Fantasy and the man's associate editor was there. And I met him and he goes, oh,
no.
I know who you are.
Oh, so the story made it back.
The story made it back. The story made it everywhere. And for years, right, this one editor, every time he saw me anywhere, it was like, hello, and bolting, right?
Oh, yeah.
But I got to tell you, in the end, he never forgot my name. He always knew who I was. And every time I sent a story, by God, if I didn't get a personalized rejection each time.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah. So, you can have venerable editor 2 inches from your cleavage, make it through and still continue to sense it's okay. They know who you are now. That for good, bad, or otherwise, it's not going to hurt you. So.
That is awesome. Seriously, folks, if of all the horrible writing stories we've had on, I mean, if we can get through this, we can get through anything together. Thank you for sharing that. That is a really, I had a smile on my face the entire time you were, because as a guy, I can imagine how uncomfortable he probably heard every 10th word you said because he just wanted to get away.
He was such a hero. I mean, I felt like it was just ridiculous, but I was so no, you don't even understand how much respect I have for you. Cause he kept a straight face. He was trying to look in my eyes. He did everything that he's awesome. So if any of your listeners have figured out who it is, or, have heard this story, just know, I had so much respect for him anyway, but now I just have so much respect for him as a human being.
That is awesome. Good humans. We love them. Okay. So Caren, first, everybody fell in love with you, with your practical personality and perspective on life. But now after that story, they got to love you even more because you got a great New York sense of humor, but they're probably wondering how they can find more about you. So can you tell us about maybe some of the highlights, some of your work that you've had out there in the past, what's been going on recently, and maybe even tease us with a little bit of what you might have out in the future? Talk yourself up. What kind of stuff would you like to share with us about your books?
Well, I'm really excited. I had a novella come out this year with Rebellion Books. It's in Dracula: Rise of the Beast. So the book is really cool. The editor, David Thomas Moore, asked 5 writers to pick characters, like basically side characters, or just drop in, secondary characters, not non-player characters, if you will, from the Bram Stoker Dracula book, and write a story about how they either met the Count or what happened to them afterwards, and something like that. So I wrote a novella about the Zagani, who are the Romany henchmen, essentially, in Dracula, called The Women. And I'm really, really happy with how it came out. And some of the things that I put together, I was really excited because David used as kind of a framing device for hanging the other novellas together to a theme. So super proud of that. So that just came out a few months ago. So it's Dracula: Rise of the Beast. And if you've read the Bram Stoker, then, and are a fan, I encourage you to pick it up. The other stories in it are really, really good too. I'm in there with some amazing folks.
Excellent. What about do you have any novels in draft in the works or ideas floating around? I know you're extremely committed to a lot of important real life. Not that writing's not real life, but day in, day out stuff. So as far as like novels, you have anything on the horizon?
So I'm finishing, knock everything, hopefully soon, finishing the first draft of the novella. I'm not sure where it's going to land, that I was talking about earlier with the alien race.
Mm-hmm.
So it's based on a story that I wrote that came out, in like 2008, called Games. And so I always really liked the dynamic of the character. The main character is a male geologist, and the alien character. And so I've extended that out into, right now it's novella length, and I'm not really, like I said, I don't have a sense of where I am yet with it, but I'm hoping I'm going to have a draft in the next few months. So I'm working on that pretty diligently. And I'm excited. So the fun parts about that are that I'm using a bunch of really, really key things from American culture specifically. The premise is that they have a summer that they're basically spending, just the two of them, and I'm not going to tell you the setup because it's very long and arduous, but interesting, I swear. But throughout the season, he shows her some of his favorite movies, and he loves 20th century comedies. So he shows her Caddyshack, and he shows her So I Married an Axe Murderer, and he teaches her Yahtzee and Monopoly, and they play video games. And it's basically a lot of what happens is about, it skewers some of the idea of the alien human love affair.
Right.
So that does not turn out the way that you think it's going to turn out. But it's been so much fun sort of thinking about how a not human, person essentially would deal with a lot of, would think about a lot of these concepts.
Right.
That's been incredibly fun. So I'm working on that. And then I'm working on a nonfiction book as well, with some licensed clinical social worker friends of mine. That is both a tarot book and a book about using imagery to help basically to help heal yourself post-trauma.
Okay.
To be used in conjunction with cognitive behavioral therapy. So a little bit of a specialized, very highly specialized nerddom nonfiction piece that's going very, very slowly, but really well.
How have you found that? Because I myself, this morning, as a matter of fact, I finally have been able to take a nonfiction manuscript and put it into Pro Writing Aid to start checking my grammar and all that stuff.
Nice.
And I've been working on this for a few months now, and I'm itching to get back into fiction. How about you? What's your experience been? I didn't know you did nonfiction as well, so this is awesome. But how has that been for you? Are you enjoying it? Does it make you long for fiction, or you're pretty?
Well, what's nice is that I'm doing 2 projects simultaneously.
Oh,
so
okay.
when I start to get itchy for fiction, then I switch over to working on the novella thing. And then when I kind of feel stuck and stupid and like I'm a giant fraud and I've wasted my entire life doing fiction, then I can swap over to the nonfiction, and it's very structured. And so that helps a lot. So
Yes.
having both projects going on at the same time has been great.
That is awesome. And everyone, I want you to listen to what she just said. Now, Homecoming, Caren, is almost 20 years old, correct?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so her Homecoming novel is almost 20 years old, and she literally just told us live on air that she's got imposter syndrome. So I'm going to need you all to stop kicking yourselves in the shin repeatedly, because even someone like Caren still has it to this day, almost 20 years after her debut novel.
Any writer that tells you they don't have it are either sociopathic, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with necessarily being a functional sociopath, or they're just lying to you, or both.
Or both, a combination, right?
Yeah.
This has been awesome, Caren. Where do you want to send folks to who maybe want to check out some of your work, or they actually want to connect with you and follow you on social media?
So I am Spit Kitten everywhere. Spit like Haktui, kitten like meow. That's moniker's been following me pretty much since I got on the internet, just because nobody can ever spell my name. Because the Caren has a C, the Gussoff is just a jumble of letters, and the Sumption's the easiest part. But Spit Kitten is pretty much me everywhere. So my website is spitkitten.com, and on all the social media channels, you can find me by just entering in Spit Kitten.
And of course, folks, just like always, I will make sure that those accounts and pages are linked in the show notes. So if you're on a device that can actually use the hyperlinks, just go there and look for them. Caren, I've been itching to do this since the spring. Time of recording, we're almost at the tail end of summer. It took me a while to finally get in touch with you. I am so glad, and that's my fault, folks. I'm not blaming Caren. It's all on me. But I am so glad we actually had this, and I do want to thank you while I've got you here, because you help. I'm a person who wanted my eyes open as far as possible. So I believe I have the right mindset, but I still have corners that I'm not peeking into out of ignorance or lack of exposure or whatever. But you helped me change as a human being that night, and hopefully today you've helped other folks as well. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I hope I get to see you again.
Yeah, me too.
In what? I don't even want to do the math. Whatever the springtime is for NorwestCon.
Yeah, it'll be here quick.
Yes, it will. So thank you for coming on, Caren. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Paul.
This has been Horrible Writing, and hopefully after this episode, you suck less than you did at the beginning. I am Paul Sading, your host extraordinaire. You can find me over on the Twitterverse @WritingHorrible and over at paulsading.com/horrible-writing. Until next time, suck less.